Nearly 3,000 years ago, a conflict erupted that would shape the myths and legends of Western civilization. The Trojan War, a decade-long battle between the Greeks and the Trojans, was immortalized by the poet Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey, two of the most significant works in history. Though debated for centuries, the story of Troy remains one of the most enduring sagas ever told. This documentary will take you through the full story of the Trojan War, from its mythological beginnings to the great battles that defined it, culminating in the fall of Troy itself. To understand the war's origins, we must first journey back to the age of gods and heroes, where the seeds of destruction were sown long before the first Greek ship set sail for Troy. The kingdom of Troy, a city of legend, Troy, an ancient and prosperous kingdom, was located near the Dardanelles Strait, controlling the vital trade routes between the Aegean and Black Seas. It was a city known for its massive fortifications, with its great walls said to be built by the gods themselves. At the height of its power, Troy was ruled by King Priam and Queen Hecuba, two of the most revered monarchs of their time. Priam was a wise and respected ruler, overseeing a kingdom with a thriving economy and powerful army. He and Hecuba had 50 sons and 50 daughters, but 3 would play key roles in Troy's fate. Hector, the eldest son and Troy's greatest warrior, a man of honor and duty, who would stand as the city's strongest defender. Cassandra, the daughter cursed with the gift of prophecy, able to see the future, but doomed never to be believed. Paris, a young prince with a fate intertwined with the gods, one whose actions would set in motion the greatest war of the ancient world. But before we reach the events that would seal Troy's destiny, we must look to Sparta, where another child was born, one whose beauty would change history. The birth of Helen and the oath of the suitors. In the Greek city of Sparta, the queen Leda gave birth to Helen, a woman destined to be the most beautiful in the world. But her birth was no ordinary one. The myths tell of Zeus, king of the gods, who fell in love with Leda. Transforming himself into a magnificent swan, he seduced her, leading to the birth of 2 eggs. From these eggs, Helen and her siblings, Castor, Pollux, and Clytemnestra, were born. As Helen grew, her beauty became legend. Kings and warriors from across Greece traveled to Sparta, all seeking her hand in marriage. Among them were some of the most powerful figures of their time: Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon and a wealthy prince of Mycenae; Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca; Ajax, the great warrior of Salamis; Diomedes, ruler of Argos and one of Greece's strongest fighters, fearing that choosing a husband could lead to war. The Greek hero Odysseus suggested an oath that all suitors would swear to defend Helen's chosen husband, no matter what. When Helen finally made her decision, she chose Menelaus, who became king of Sparta. For years it seemed that Greece had avoided disaster, but the oath of the suitors would soon become the very thing that plunged them into war. The judgment of Paris, a divine conflict. While the mortal world went on, a wedding was taking place among the gods. Thetis, a sea goddess, was set to marry the Greek king Peleus, a union that would later give birth to Achilles, the greatest warrior of the age. All the gods were invited to the wedding, except one. The goddess Eris, known as the bringer of discord, was not welcome. Furious at the insult, she arrived uninvited, carrying a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the most beautiful." At once 3 goddesses claimed it: Hera, queen of the gods, who ruled over marriage and power; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Unable to decide who was most worthy, they turned to Zeus. But Zeus, unwilling to choose, gave the responsibility to a mortal, a young shepherd who was, in truth, none other than Prince Paris of Troy. Raised in exile, Paris had been abandoned as an infant, because of a prophecy foretelling that he would bring Troy to ruin. But the shepherd who was tasked with his death could not bring himself to do it, and instead raised Paris in secret. Now, as an adult, he was unknowingly set on a path that would fulfill the prophecy. The bribes of the goddesses. One by one the 3 goddesses came to Paris, offering him gifts in exchange for the golden apple. Hera promised him power that he would rule over all of Asia as the greatest king. Athena offered unmatched skill in war, making him invincible on the battlefield. Aphrodite, knowing the desires of the young man, promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta. Paris, unable to resist Aphrodite's offer, handed her the golden apple. At that moment the seeds of war were sown. The abduction of Helen. The war begins. Guided by Aphrodite, Paris traveled to Sparta, where he was welcomed as a guest in Menelaus's palace. But while the Spartan king was away at a funeral, Paris and Helen fell under Aphrodite's influence. The two fled together, sailing back to Troy, where Paris was welcomed as a prince at his father's court. The Trojans, mesmerized by Helen's beauty, celebrated her arrival, but among them two voices spoke of doom. Hector, Paris's brother, who warned that this act would bring war upon their city. Cassandra, cursed by Apollo, who screamed that Troy would burn because of Helen. But as always, no one believed her prophecy. In Sparta, Menelaus returned to find his wife gone, taken by a Trojan prince. Enraged, he called upon the oath of the suit. Messengers were sent across all of Greece, calling its warriors to arms. Soon the mightiest kings and greatest warriors assembled under Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother and the most powerful ruler of Greece. Odysseus of Ithaca, known for his cunning. Diomedes of Argos, the favorite of Athena. Ajax the Greater, the strongest of all Greek warriors. Nestor of Pylos, the wise elder of the Achaeans. And finally they sought out Achilles, the son of Peleus and Thetis, whose destiny was tied to the war. With 1,000 ships gathered, Agamemnon led the fleet across the Aegean, beginning the journey that would shape history. The war for Troy had begun. The Greek invasion and the wrath of Achilles. With the Greek fleet assembled, the armies of Agamemnon, Menelaus and the other Achaean kings set sail across the Aegean Sea, bound for Troy. Over 1,000 ships carried the mightiest warriors of Greece, prepared for a war that would shape legend. Covers the arrival of the Greek forces, their first engagements against Troy, and the rising tensions between Achilles and Agamemnon. A conflict that would alter the course of the war itself. The Greek fleet sails for Troy. The journey across the Aegean was long, with over 100,000 warriors crammed into their wooden ships. As they neared Troy's shores, anticipation filled the air. Many of these men had waited years for this moment. Leading the expedition was Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, who commanded the largest fleet. But among the assembled warriors, one name stood above all others: Achilles, the son of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis. Known as the greatest warrior of his age, Achilles had a fate unlike any other. If he chose to fight in Troy, he would gain eternal glory but die young. If he chose to stay home, he would live a long life but be forgotten. He had made his choice, and now he stood at the head of his men, ready for war. The first mistake: the Greeks land on the wrong shore. The Greek fleet mistakenly landed on the shores of Mysia, thinking it was Troy. The ruler of Mysia, King Telephus, led his warriors against the Greeks, and a battle erupted. During the battle, Achilles wounded Telephus, striking him with his spear. But instead of dying, Telephus survived. His wound would not heal. Realizing their mistake, the Greeks returned to their ships, now knowing the true location of Troy. But Telephus sought healing, and the oracle revealed that only the one who wounded him could heal him. He found the Greeks, and begged Achilles for help. Achilles, at first reluctant, was convinced when Odysseus devised a plan. If Telephus helped guide the fleet to Troy, Achilles would heal him. The deal was made, and with Telephus's guidance, the fleet finally arrived at the shores of Troy. The first battle, Protesilaus, steps onto Trojan soil. The Greeks landed on the beaches of Troy, with their ships stretching as far as the eye could see. But a prophecy foretold that the first Greek to set foot on Trojan soil would die. The warriors hesitated, until one man, Protesilaus, king of Phyllis, bravely leaped from his ship. As he charged forward, he was immediately struck down by a Trojan spear, fulfilling the prophecy. With this first blood spilled, the battle began in full force. Hector and the Trojan defense. Troy's greatest warrior, Prince Hector, led his forces to repel the Greek land. Unlike Paris, his younger brother Hector was a true warrior, one who fought not for love or selfish desires, but for his city and his family. As the Greeks stormed the beaches, Hector and the Trojan army rushed to meet them, determined to push them back into the sea. The battle raged for hours, and for a time the Trojans held firm. But the Greeks were relentless. With warriors like Ajax, Diomedes and Achilles cutting down wave after wave of Trojan soldiers, the Trojans were eventually forced to retreat behind the city wall. With the beaches secured, the Greeks established their camp, beginning what would become a 10-year siege of Troy. The siege begins. Raids on Trojan territories. For the next 9 years the war continued in a series of raids and battles, rather than direct assaults on Troy's wall. The Greeks, unable to break through, instead attacked Trojan allies, weakening their supply lines. During this time, Achilles led attacks on the islands of Lesbos and Tenedos, capturing supply. The Greeks sacked the city of Lyrnessus, taking captives including 2 women who would change the course of the war, Chryseis and Briseis. Paris avoided combat while Hector led Trojan defenses, keeping the Greeks at bay. Though the Trojans suffered losses, their walls remained unbreakable, and the Greeks could not breach the city. The war stretched on, with neither side able to claim victory. The wrath of Achilles, a fatal dispute. Among the captured women was Chryseis, the daughter of Chryseis, a priest of Apollo. Agamemnon took her as his personal concubine, refusing to return her despite her father's pleas and offers of ransom. In rage, Chryseis prayed to Apollo, who answered his call, sending a plague upon the Greek army. Men fell sick and died, their bodies piling up in the camp. The Greeks demanded Agamemnon release Chryseis, but he refused. Finally, Achilles confronted Agamemnon, demanding he end the plague. Agamemnon, furious at being challenged, agreed, but only if he could take Achilles' prize instead. Briseis, a captured princess, had been given to Achilles after the raid on Lyrnessus. Though a spoil of war, Achilles had come to care for her, and Agamemnon's demand enraged him. In his fury, Achilles nearly drew his sword to kill Agamemnon, but before he could strike, Athena appeared, stopping him. "Do not let your anger consume you," she warned. "The time for vengeance will come." Instead of fighting, Achilles swore he would no longer fight for the Greeks. He returned to his tent, vowing that without him, the Greeks would suffer for Agamemnon's arrogance. The Greeks struggle without Achilles. With Achilles refusing to fight, the Greek forces began to falter. Seeing the weakness in the enemy, Hector led a Trojan counterattack, driving the Greeks back to their ships. The once unstoppable Greek army now struggled without their strongest warrior. The Trojans began burning Greek ships, threatening to trap the invaders with no means of escape. Hector led his men to victory after victory, proving himself the greatest warrior of Troy. The Greek leaders begged Achilles to return, but he refused. Only when his closest friend, Patroclus, made a fateful decision did the war take a new turn, one that would bring Achilles back onto the battlefield and seal Hector's fate. The death of Patroclus and the rage of Achilles. The Trojan War had raged for nearly a decade. After the Greeks raided Trojan allies, Agamemnon and Achilles quarreled, leading Achilles to withdraw from battle. Without their strongest warrior, the Greeks suffered one defeat after another. As Hector and the Trojans pushed the Greeks to the brink of destruction, one man would make a desperate gamble to save them: Patroclus, the closest companion of Achilles. His actions would set in motion a chain of tragic events that would bring Achilles back into the war, and ultimately seal Hector's fate. Hector's onslaught, the Greeks on the verge of defeat. With Achilles refusing to fight, the Trojans seized the advantage. Hector, now the undisputed champion of Troy, led fierce counterattacks against the Greeks, pushing them back to their ships. The Trojans breached the Greek defenses, setting fire to the Achaean fleet. Panic spread through the Greek ranks, as their only way home burned before their eyes. Hector drove his chariot through the battlefield, cutting down warriors without mercy. Inside his tent, Achilles remained unmoved. Even as the cries of the dying echoed across the shore, his anger toward Agamemnon kept him away from battle. But one man could not stand by and watch the Greeks fall: Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend and confidant. Patroclus' desperate plea. Patroclus had grown up with Achilles, trained beside him and shared his victory. Though he was not as powerful as his friend, Patroclus was a formidable warrior in his own right. With tears in his eyes, Patroclus approached Achilles, begging him to return to battle. "If you will not fight, then lend me your armor, and the Trojans will think Achilles has returned. Their fear will drive them back to Troy." Achilles hesitated. He had vowed never to fight under Agamemnon's command again, but he could not bear to see Patroclus plead. He gave Patroclus his armor, warning him only to drive the Trojans back, not to chase them to the walls of Troy. Patroclus nodded in agreement, though deep inside he thirsted for more than just a defensive victory. With Achilles' golden armor upon him, Patroclus mounted a chariot and charged into battle. The Greeks' last stand. The battle turns. As Patroclus rushed onto the battlefield, the Greek warriors rallied behind him, believing Achilles had returned. The Trojans, seeing the familiar golden armor, panicked. Patroclus cut through their ranks, slaughtering Trojan warriors by the dozen. Even the mighty Sarpedon, son of Zeus, fell to his spear. The Greeks, inspired by their newfound hope, pushed forward, reclaiming the burning ships, and forcing the Trojans to retreat. The plan had worked perfectly, but Patroclus wanted more. Ignoring Achilles' warning, he pursued the fleeing Trojans, driving them all the way back to the gates of Troy. There Hector awaited him. The duel, Hector versus Patroclus. With Troy's massive gates behind him, Hector turned to face what he thought was Achilles. He saw the golden armor, the furious charge, and heard the war cries that shook the battlefield. But Hector was no fool. He soon realized that this was not Achilles himself, but another warrior in his place. Still, Hector stood his ground. The duel began. Patroclus fought valiantly, striking Hector's shield with relentless fury. But as the battle wore on, the gods intervened. Apollo, protector of Troy, struck Patroclus from behind, causing him to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, Hector drove his spear through Patroclus's chest, killing him. As Patroclus lay dying, he gasped out his final words. "Hector, you have won, but not by your own hand. My death is the work of the gods. And know this, Achilles will come for you. And when he does, he will end you." With his last breath, Patroclus smiled, knowing his death would bring Achilles back to battle. Achilles' grief and vengeance. When Achilles heard the news of Patroclus's death, something inside him broke. He did not weep. He did not Instead, he stood in silence, his mind consumed by rage. Then, with a cry that echoed across the battlefield, Achilles swore vengeance upon Hector. He refused food and drink, consumed only by thoughts of bloodshed. He blamed himself for Patroclus's death, regretting that he had let his pride keep him from the battlefield. He cursed the gods, swearing to kill Hector, no matter the cost. That night, Thetis, his mother, descended from the sea. Seeing her son's sorrow, she promised him a new set of armor, forged by the god Hephaestus himself. And so the greatest armor ever crafted was made, a shield that reflected the entire world, a helmet that gleamed like the sun, and a breastplate that no weapon could pierce. With his new divine armor, Achilles prepared to return to battle. The bloodbath, Achilles unleashed. The next morning, the sun rose upon a changed battlefield. The Greeks, seeing Achilles return, roared in triumph. The Trojans, seeing him, felt fear for the first time. Achilles charged into battle, slaughtering Trojans by the dozens. His spear found no equal, and his rage knew no mercy. The river Scamander, filled with the blood of Trojans, turned red. Even the gods feared his wrath, as he killed so many warriors that the river god himself rose against him, trying to drown Achilles in revenge. But even nature could not stop him. Achilles was no longer fighting for Greece, he was fighting for vengeance. And Hector was next. Hector's fate, the final duel. As Achilles stormed towards Troy, Hector's family begged him to stay behind the city walls. Even King Priam, his father, pleaded with him. "Do not face Achilles alone. He is no mere man, he is death itself." But Hector knew he could not run forever. So he stood outside the walls of Troy, waiting for Achilles. As Achilles approached, Hector's courage faltered. For the first time, he felt fear, and in that moment, he did the one thing he never thought he would do. He ran. But Achilles was faster. He chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 times, like a predator hunting its prey. Finally, Hector stopped. He turned, raised his sword, and prepared to fight. The duel began. Hector fought valiantly, dodging Achilles' attacks, and striking where he could. But Achilles was unstoppable. In one final move,
Achilles drove his spear into Hector's throat, killing him. With his last breath, Hector begged Achilles to return his body to his family, but Achilles, blinded by rage, refused. Instead, he tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it through the dust, humiliating Troy's fallen prince. The fall of Troy. The death of Hector left Troy without its strongest defender. Achilles had returned to the battlefield, and the Greek army, now emboldened, continued their relentless assault. But even as the war dragged on, Troy's walls remained impenetrable. For 10 long years, the Greeks had failed to breach the city's defense. It seemed as if the Trojans might still survive. But then came a plan, a strategy so cunning, so unexpected, that it would bring about the end of Troy in a single night. This is the story of the Trojan Horse, and the final fall of Troy. The Trojan Horse, a trick that shaped history. After 10 years of fighting, the Greeks realized that brute force would never bring down the walls of Troy. So Odysseus devised a deception, a strategy that would go down as one of the most brilliant in military history. The construction of the horse. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse, hollowed out to fit soldiers inside. Upon the horse, they carved a message, a gift to Athena, may she bless our safe return home. They then burned their camps, sailed their fleet out of sight, and left the horse at the gates of Troy. The Trojans' fateful decision. At dawn, the Trojans discovered the horse, and believed the war was over. Some cheered, believing the Greeks had fled in defeat. Others, like Cassandra, saw the truth. She begged them not to bring it inside. The priest Laocoon, who also suspected a trap, warned them beware of Greeks bearing gifts. But before he could say more, 2 serpents emerged from the sea, sent by the gods, and killed him and his son. Seeing this as a divine omen, the Trojans dragged the horse into the city, believing it to be a blessing from Athena. That night, they celebrated their victory, drinking, feasting, and finally falling into a deep sleep. They had no idea that inside the horse, Odysseus and his warriors were waiting. The fall of Troy. Fire and blood. At midnight, the Greek fleet returned in silence, hiding in the darkness of the shore. The soldiers inside the horse emerged, killing the night guards and opening the city gate. The Greek army rushed in, swords drawn, setting fire to Troy. The Trojans, still drunk from their celebrations, woke to find their city in flames. The slaughter, no mercy was shown. The Greek warriors rampaged through the city. King Priam, once a proud ruler, was dragged to the altar of Zeus. He pleaded for mercy, but Paris, son of Achilles, cut him down with his sword. The women and children were taken as slaves, while the men were slain. Hector's infant son, Astyanax, was thrown from the city walls, ensuring no future heir could reclaim Troy. In the temple of Athena, Cassandra was found. Despite her pleas and prophecies, she was dragged away by Agamemnon, her fate sealed in tragedy. Troy, once a mighty kingdom, was no more. The fate of the survivors. As the sun rose, the smoke of Troy darkened the sky. A handful of Trojans managed to escape, including Aeneas, a warrior destined for a far greater purpose. Guided by the gods, Aeneas led a small band of survivors across the sea, where they would one day found a new civilization, Rome. The return of the Greek kings. The Greek warriors, having won their war, set sail for home, but the gods were not finished with them. Agamemnon returned to Mycenae, only to be murdered by his wife in revenge for the sacrifice of their daughter. Odysseus faced a 10-year journey filled with monsters, gods and storms, which would become the tale of the Odyssey. Menelaus and Helen, now reunited, returned to Sparta, where they lived out their days as rulers. The legacy of Troy. The Trojan War had ended, but its echoes would shape the future. The fall of Troy inspired countless myths, poems and histories, making it one of the greatest legends of the ancient world. Aeneas's journey to Italy would lead to the rise of Rome, ensuring that Troy's legacy lived on through the Roman Empire. The names Achilles, Hector, Odysseus and Helen would be remembered for millennia, passed down from generation to generation. Though Troy was reduced to ruins, its story never faded. The journey home. The cursed voyage of the Greeks. The Trojan War had finally ended. The city of Troy lay in ruins, its walls shattered, its people either dead or enslaved. The Greeks, after 10 years of war, could finally return home, but victory came at a cost. The gods had not forgotten the violence and desecration the Greeks had committed. As they set sail across the Aegean, they would face storms, curses, and divine wrath. Some would never return, others would find only tragedy awaiting them. This is the story of the journey home. The gods' wrath. A doomed voyage. The Greeks had won, but they had angered the god. Poseidon, god of the sea, had watched in fury as the Greeks defiled temples and slaughtered innocents. Athena, once their greatest ally, had turned against them after the brutal desecration of her temple. Apollo, who had seen his priest insulted and Cassandra dishonored, swore vengeance. As the Greek fleet set sail, the gods unleashed their fury. The great storm. The fleet was scattered as a massive storm descended upon them. Ships capsized, warriors drowned, and men who had fought for 10 years were swallowed by the sea in mere moments. Many of the greatest kings and warriors of Greece never saw their homes again. Agamemnon's return. A king betrayed. King Agamemnon, leader of the Greek forces, survived the storm and returned to Mycenae. But victory had changed him. He had become ruthless, arrogant, and blind to danger. Waiting for him in Mycenae was his wife, Clytemnestra. She had never forgiven him for the sacrifice of their daughter Iphigenia, whom he had killed to appease the gods before the war. The murder of Agamemnon. When Agamemnon entered his palace, Clytemnestra greeted him with false warning. That night, as he bathed, she entered the chamber, a dagger hidden beneath her robe. Before he could react, she plunged the blade into his chest, ending his life. The once great commander of the Greek armies fell not on the battlefield, but in his own home, betrayed by his own wife. Clytemnestra's revenge was complete, but it would not go unpunished. Her own son Orestes would one day return to take vengeance, setting in motion another bloody chapter in the history of Mycenae. Menelaus and Helen. A return to Sparta. King Menelaus, husband of Helen, survived the storm but was blown off course. For years he and his men wandered the seas, visiting distant lands, searching for a way home. The trials of Menelaus. He sailed to Egypt, where he was trapped by the gods, forced to learn their secrets before being allowed to return. He wandered for 7 years before finally making it back to Sparta. When Menelaus returned home, Helen was waiting for him. She had spent years facing the hatred of her people, blamed for the war that destroyed Troy. But Menelaus chose to forgive her, and together they ruled Sparta once more. Unlike Agamemnon, Menelaus found peace, and according to legend, he and Helen were granted immortality, living forever in paradise. The cursed voyage of Odysseus. But not all Greeks were so lucky. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, had fought bravely in Troy. He had been the mind behind the Trojan Horse, the strategist who led the Greeks to victory. But the gods were not finished with him. Poseidon, god of the sea, saw Odysseus as too arrogant, too proud of his intelligence, and so he cursed him. The journey that lasted 10 years, what should have been a short voyage home, became a decade-long odyssey. Odysseus and his men were blown off course, forced to wander the edges of the known world. Odysseus would face monsters, sorceresses, the Cyclops Polyphemus, a giant who devoured his men alive, the sorceress Circe, who turned his men into animals, the Lotus Eaters, who tempted his men into forgetting their home, the deadly sirens, whose songs led sailors to their death, the underworld itself, where Odysseus spoke to the dead spirits of the past. For 10 years he fought against the wrath of the gods, but all the while his kingdom of Ithaca waited. His wife, Penelope, remained loyal. Despite suitors who sought to take his throne, would Odysseus ever return? His fate was uncertain, but his story was not yet over. The rise of Rome, Aeneas and the legacy of Troy. While the Greeks suffered on their journeys home, a different fate awaited one of Troy's survivors. Aeneas, the Trojan warrior who had escaped the burning city, carried with him a destiny foretold by the gods. Led by Venus, his mother, Aeneas and his followers set sail west. The journey of Aeneas. He traveled through the Mediterranean, encountering the same dangers as Odysseus. He met Dido, queen of Carthage, who fell in love with him, only for him to leave her, as he was destined for greater things. He journeyed to Italy, where his descendants would one day found the city of Rome. The Trojans were not truly gone. They had survived, and one day, their descendants would rise again to challenge Greece's legacy. The war that had destroyed one city would give birth to another, Rome, the future empire of the world, the end of the age of heroes. The Greek kings had won Troy, but their victory was cursed. Some never made it home, others found only death waiting for them. Troy had fallen, but its legacy lived on.